being here. Grab your munchies and come have a seat. My name is Helen Margaret Nasser, and I'm the director of the Student Union and Intercultural Center. And I'm so excited to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of our groundbreaking leadership series. So with that, we're very excited to be welcoming author Evitts Dickinson. And I also want to explain a little bit about the motivation behind the groundbreaking leadership series. So the idea behind this is you're all studying different disciplines today, mostly in the fashion field, right? And maybe you are not sure about how it came to be that this fashion came this way, or what path that led you to make these choices. Or maybe you know all that because you watch The Devil Wears Prada. But you should really be thinking about who blazed the trail. And that's what this conversation is about today. And what decisions were made, whether they were hard, whether they were easy. Who was making
Would you want to actually read from the book,
or should I just... What choices did they have? What pressures did they have? And that's how we are in the position we are today to make the choices that we make today. So I was very pleased when Professor Palladino came to me with this idea to learn a bit about Claire McCardle through the lens of Elizabeth and her book. And now it's an invitation for our colleagues, our faculty and staff to continue this series and bring forth other leaders that we can explore as our students are studying in their classes to think about how did we get to this point and the decisions and the leadership and the courage that was required to make it available for us to study what we're studying. And what leadership and what courage will all of you bring when you're in your fields and your careers and your disciplines. And we'll be happy to bring you back here as an author or as a leader, as a trailblazer in your careers one day to come back to Kingsborough. So I'm so glad to have all of you here. And once again, a welcome to Elizabeth.
Thank you.
We're joined on the panel today with Professor Palladino and Professor Nareski. And they'll have some questions for Elizabeth and a nice dialogue. And afterwards, we'll have an opportunity for a photo, a group photo, and Elizabeth will graciously sign some of the copies of the book. So with that, enjoy the discussion, and thank you for being with us today.
I just want to repeat the thank you to be here today, and especially to Elizabeth, who traveled all the way from Massachusetts to be here today.
No, from Baltimore.
Baltimore, okay, so it's close. It's a country over there somewhere, right? So we're very pleased to have her here today, but especially pleased to share with us, because Kate and I, if you all know, I'm being told to stand up.
Speak up.
Speak up, which is never an issue, right? Today it's an issue. That we both have this admiration for this designer, who sadly is not known for whatever reason. So just in the room, how many people have ever heard of this person? A resounding half of one. There's a half of one right there. That's okay, because I think after today in our discussions, you'll see why Claire is kicking off this series through the words of Elizabeth and the research that Elizabeth did to bring her to life for us. So I'm just going to start with an anecdote from the book, then I'll pass it off to both my new colleague and my colleague. There's a great story when Claire was a little girl that she was sitting in her room or the living room, and she was looking through magazines, and she was looking through fashion magazines, and she was cutting them up and changing heads, tops, bottoms, and she was very little, but all of a sudden she had this awareness that she was changing the way things could look. And a little friend, first of all, it was sacrilegious to cut the picture. Right? It's like, why are you cutting these pictures? She goes, well, I think I want to make the clothes better. And that little girl, to have that realization in her head that she wanted to make the clothes better, is what carried her through her entire life and career. She wasn't necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel. She just wanted to make clothes better. And for who? Women like herself. So with that, I just want to, I'll pass the baton to you, just to reflect on that moment and how it impacted her future.
Sure. Can you all hear me okay? So it's good to know where Claire was in time and place when that happened. She was born in 1905. She lived in a tiny town called Frederick, Maryland. Frederick was kind of in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't culturally remote. There was theater, there was art, there was a lot happening in Frederick, but it was not at the center of fashion by any stretch. It was kind of between DC and Baltimore. And in 1905, there's no such thing as ready to wear, right? You can't go to the store and shop the racks. You could get a handful of things ready-made, like stockings or gloves. But for the most part, the way you got clothes was you sewed them yourself, you sewed them from patterns, or you sewed them from memory. Or if you were lucky like Claire, who had an upper middle class family, you could bring in someone to help sew clothes once or twice a season or a year to work from the patterns. And I think the other thing that's important to remember at this moment in time is, what were people wearing? It was still kind of coming out of the late Victorian era. So her mother's generation was getting dressed with an insane amount of understructure, right? Her great-grandmother and her grandmother wore dresses that had crinolines, you know, those huge things that poof out the skirts, and there were corsets, and there were stays, and they were very, very rigid and very structured to make the woman's body fit the trend of the time, right? And the trend of the time was the Gibson girl era. So the silhouette was what one fashion historian said made every poor woman look like a pigeon about to topple over, because there was a bustle out the back, and so they were really small-waisted, and then they kind of stood like they were tipping forward. And the other thing was there were a lot of rules about clothes. Her mother followed those rules. So you had your house dress. You wouldn't dare go outside in that house dress. You would dress up in a day dress to go out and do your thing. Then, oh my God, it's tea time. Now you need to wear a tea gown. And if you went out to dinner, there was another type of dress to wear. And there were a lot of rules about what you were supposed to do and wear. And one thing McCardle realized very young, because she had 3 brothers, is that her brothers had different rules than she did. They got to wear pants, they got to have pockets. It was rural. They went out and did stuff. They climbed trees, they fished, they played baseball. And she noticed that it was a lot easier for her brothers to get around in the world than it was for her, who was always required to be wearing dresses. And so not only from an early age was she getting in trouble cutting up her mother's Vogue magazines, but she was also recognizing this big disparity in how a woman was allowed to dress and how a boy was allowed to dress. And I think the final thing to know at that moment is there's no New York fashion industry at that moment. It doesn't exist, right? Where were we getting all of our cues for fashion? It was coming from Paris. Paris was the place. It was the thing that sent out all the design ideas in the world. And so when Claire's mom got a pattern to make a new dress, she got it from Paris, because that's all Vogue and Harper's Bazaar were writing about at the time, were Paris designers. Yeah.
Additionally, I'd like to expand on this notion where Claire McCardle did not feel she had to accept the limitations of fashion. And in your book makes reference to fashion as rebellion. Could you talk about how McCardle embraced this notion and incorporated it into her designs?
Yeah, the thing that struck me about Claire McCardle is, can I ask how many people wear ballet flats? We'll get to a little bit of this. Ballet flats, you like ballet flats. How many people like leggings? What about wrap dresses? What about mix and match separates? Okay, you're gonna hear why Claire was either the inventor or the pioneer of all of these things. So much of what we all wear today goes back to her design board. And she was highly, highly influential. So what was she rebelling against? She was very rebellious, because women were being told to dress a certain way, women were told they had to appear a certain way in society. One of the earliest stories that really brought this home to me was in the 1920s. Claire McCardle goes to a sleepaway camp, and it's at a lake near her house. And I did not know this, women were required to wear wool swim stockings on public beaches. Did you know this? Stockings, wool stockings. I was like, say what now? I saw a picture of it and I'm like, why are these women wearing tights on the beach? This is weird. And it's because don't forget that fashion isn't just an ephemeral thing. It's a cultural mandate at times. Think of all the rules that are written into municipal codes, into city codes, right? You could get arrested at the time for wearing clothes that weren't your gender. You could get arrested as a woman up until the 30s for wearing pants in public, and I write about such a story in my book. And you could get fined or arrested for having bare exposed legs on a public beach. So it was called a bathing suit for a reason. At the time, it was like a dress. And then you were supposed to cover your legs because God forbid anyone saw your knees, right? And so McCardle at this summer camp convinced all of her friends that they should take their swim stockings off because McCardle was a swimmer. She liked to swim. She was athletic, and all that fabric just got in the way. And they did. They got in trouble. When they got back to shore, they all had to walk around in a circle with axes over their shoulders and like march because they dared to not wear their swim stockings.
Yeah, you know, am I here? Can you hear me? Am I on? Sorry. Give me a microphone, right?
You want mine?
No. So when we teach, we're teaching in 2026, right? And there's such a distance between what we're learning and where we're living. But you've got to know where we were to know where we're going, right? And Claire McCardle was someone like that. Claire McCardle broke all the rules. She didn't care about the rules. But you know how tough that is when you're a woman? It's impossible. The men would dictate.
At a time you couldn't get your own bank account or your own credit line. Like a woman wasn't allowed to open up her own funding. Yeah.
Nothing.
Yep.
You had nothing. You had no value without a man. And if you did have a man, he took all your value. So, you know, here's a woman that is saying, hell no. But she didn't say it quite like that. She was kept her head down, did what she thought was right. And for that, we applaud her to this day. One of the other things that I liked about her was the idea of sustainability, of what she was doing with fabrics that we would never have thought of back then. She, you know, it was the war years. You have to think it was the 40s, so there were restrictions on fabrics. You couldn't use certain fabrics, and if you could use certain fabrics, you were restricted to the yardage that you could use. So the government here and abroad was telling you how wide a skirt could be, how long a skirt could be, how wide a jacket could be, how long pants, everything was dictated to you. So she didn't feel like that was a problem. She felt it was pushing her to come up with a solution. So she was using cotton for evening wear. And people were like shocked. What do you mean you're using cotton for evening wear? And she goes, why not? So she brought that same level of detail that you, as future designers and as current students, might bring to silk, right? Satin. She brought it to cotton. She did not feel that you should change your ethic, your aesthetic to suit the needs or the economic needs of reality. She wanted to bring her vision to everyone. She didn't want it to, I'm going to say this word wrong, democratize design, because then it's worthless. If everybody can't join in, then what am I doing? Right, so I'll pass that.
Yeah, I mean, what else was she rebelling against? She was rebelling against this idea that Paris was the arbiter of good taste. She was a young American who felt that American lives were different. But what were all the young Americans supposed to do? They were supposed to go worship at the feet of Paris. So she finally convinces her parents to let her go from rural Frederick, Maryland, and come to go to what is now known as Parsons. At the time, it had a different name. And I write in the book about how even that was hard because there weren't a lot of places for women who were unmarried and young to live in safety. And at the time, Parsons wasn't really teaching fashion design so much as it was teaching like how to emulate European culture. Her education was widely in the fine arts, it was in sketching, it was in drawing dresses. They would go to the Met and to the Brooklyn Art Museum and they would draw the clothes. And then she had the great fortune of being able to do a year abroad in Paris. Imagine being in Paris in the 1920s, right? It's like, there's a lot of cool stuff happening. But she wasn't, again, being told to design clothes. She was being taught to go in and look at the couture lines, the haute couture designers like Coco Chanel, like Madeleine Vianney, and to quickly sketch what she saw. And the reason is that the way that most American manufacturers got their ideas was they stole them outright from France. So at the time, 7th Avenue wasn't this place of great design. There was no such thing as an American designer with their name on a label. There was no such thing as, you know, a brand like Ralph Lauren or whatever. And what they were doing was they were training them to basically copy Paris. And McCardle was writing home to her parents and saying, I don't want to do any of this designer stealing. I want to make clothes for American women. And talking about that democratization is what you're coming out of is a system that was built on only the wealthiest got to have the nicest clothes. And it was all haute couture. It was all custom made. If you had money, you would go to Paris a couple times a year. They would take your measurements. They would make your clothes. It would take months. You know, and it was really expensive. And if you were in America and you could afford it, you would go to Lord & Taylor, or you would go, you know, to the high-end stores, and you would also buy the couture design. But what about the rest of us? And so McCardle's training was in stealing Parisian design. But then when she came back to America, she got a job working as a designer, and really she just started like sneaking her own ideas into the sketches she was giving the male manufacturers, because she was always trying to get this new style of clothing into the system.
Yeah. Technology. So I think most important was, if you fast forward now, the world is still revering Paris. Paris was like a brand. You know, like you guys want to wear Chanel, Prada, Fendi, Gucci. That was Paris. If you weren't wearing Parisian fashion, you were naked. What you had on was worthless. And Claire McCardle was quick to realize American women don't live life like that. They don't live like that. They don't slither in and out of opera houses and fine dining. You know, they're home, maybe raising children, maybe working in a factory, maybe working out of the home, 2 people working out of the home. What does she need all this for? When is she wearing that dress? She's not. So if you fast forward then to post-World War II, right? And you get into now Dior, and the world that embraced Christian Dior, they have Claire McCardle saying, what? What is this, right? Now you're telling me you're bringing the corset back. So I read this book like 3 times. I read this book for the first time last summer, and that's when Elizabeth and I started walking, and of course Kate and I started screaming on the phone about how much we love her, like 2 little teenage fans. But the point is that she really was looking at American women, and as a business person, she was looking at her customer, the client, the person that was going to buy what she was making. She wasn't looking at design as this thing that happens in a bubble. She was one of the first people that believed in form and function, right? You will hear that, form and function, right? It needs to look a certain way, but it has to work. Clothing that doesn't work for you, you shouldn't be buying in the first place. So I don't want to...
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great point. What was she designing for? You know, you'd get these fancy couture jackets and you couldn't raise your hand to hail a cab. You couldn't get on the subway. She was a working woman in New York. She lived alone. She once made the joke, you might live alone and like it, but if you wrench your hand out trying to zip up a back zipper, how many of you have had that moment as a woman not being able to get the dress on because it doesn't allow you to get the dress on, right? So she wasn't just designing for the every woman, she was designing for herself, and she was making herself the point of view. So rather than being the objectified woman that was the pretty flower, as Dior literally said he wanted to make his women beautiful flowers, McArdle wanted agency. She was the story. She wanted to live her own life. And what's so interesting to me about this moment in time, the 30s and 40s in New York particularly, is much of this was happening because of women. It was women in the fashion industry who were working together, who were building up this whole idea of what we understand to be the modern fashion industry today. And so if you look at some of the dresses later up on the wall or in the book, you can see why it's such a big difference. Like, where's the corset? There's no corset. In the monastic dress that she designed in the 30s, one manufacturer on 7th Avenue was like, oh my God, there's no front, there's no back, you just put it over your head and it looks like a tent. I don't understand this. But what McArdle understood is with the belt, you could shape it and it flowed beautifully. She understood if you bias cut something, you cut it on the bias, you could make it shape to a body, and you could make it shape to a real woman's body. So it was about the clothes fitting the woman, not the woman fitting the clothes. And at first, all the male manufacturers were like, nah. And then she just kept pushing and pushing. And what I loved about writing this book was showing those moments where she kept hearing no. Like, being a visionary, being a leader is a lonely thing, I think, right? Like, being the first is very lonely. And so what does it take for somebody to be outnumbered and outmatched in a lot of ways and still keep having the tenacity to say, I think you're wrong? And guess what? That monastic dress went on to be the best-selling design. It kept selling out of department stores, so much so that now people were copying Claire McArdle. Like, all of a sudden, she's being copied. Yeah.
There was that story where she wore it into the shop, and
She-
they ordered that, but it wasn't on the line.
She did. She had this clever trick. It's a story I tell in the book where her boss said, that dress, that monastic dress, doesn't have any hanger appeal. Because at the time, a structured dress, if you put a corseted kind of dress on a mannequin or a hanger, it had a shape. McArdle used to joke that her great-grandmother's dresses looked like they were inhabited by ghosts because they could stand up on their own. And she was very funny about it. She's like, I have nothing against crinolines. I just hate wearing one and trying to get into an elevator, right? Because you're so wide. And she's like, you could get hurt in New York wearing the kinds of clothes people are trying to put us in. And the monastic didn't have hanger appeal, is what her boss said. So she showed up the day she knew that a buyer from one of the big department stores was going to be in the warehouse on 7th Avenue, and she was wearing the dress. And she walked by and the guy said, wait a minute, you didn't show me that one. And he ended up buying nothing else from the line, because those were all the designs her boss told her to make, and they bought that one. And so she was really clever about having to also articulate why this was such a shift. Can I tell the story of separates very quickly? Because
No.
I know.
I have a question about it later, so you can just do it now.
Great. So, all right, so one of the things that she had, think about this. You're going to Paris every few seasons because that's where you're supposed to go to get your design ideas. There's no planes. You're going over on the boats. A lot of fun stuff happened on those boats. Let me tell you, what happens on a luxury steamship stays on a luxury steamship. I tell a little bit about it in the book. But these women were having to carry these huge, big cases of clothes. Like, there are stories of like all the work that went into packing up a big trunk. And McArdle was so sick of that. She had to get her trunk down to the dock. She had to, even with help, it was a pain. So she had this crazy idea. She's like, well, what if I love wool jersey, it doesn't wrinkle, it packs really well, it's light. And her idea was, what if I made 5 pieces, 6 pieces of the same material, a halter, a pair of pants, a skirt, and I mixed and matched them. And then I could make multiple outfits out of one outfit. And this was the early 1930s. And at the time, merchandising didn't work that way. No stores, it took her 10 years to get what we now understand to be mix and match separates, capsule wardrobes, into the department stores. And now that's literally, the foundation of American sportswear. And really what it was is she said, I'm solving problems with my clothes. So what she wanted more than anything was not only to be beautiful, but she wanted it to solve a problem and make sense for the lives of the women that she was designing for.
There's a lot of talk about how practical she was in the form and function. Michael was talking that before. I would just like her most, I mean, she has many, many famous looks. You were talking about the monastic dress. Probably the one that's noted most in the history books is the popover dress. Could you just describe how the popover dress became a culmination of the ideology of form and function and utilitarianism?
Yeah, so she's coming up in the 20s and 30s, and then as Michael alluded to, here comes World War II. So everything changes in World War II. And it was an interesting moment because really it was like, okay, how is the American fashion world, which was really nascent, how are you going to step up and start to participate in design now that your design stealing can't happen from Paris anymore? Well, there was, I guess you would call her the Miranda Priestley of her day. It was a woman named Diana Vreeland, who was at the time with Harper's Bazaar, but would go on to be the long-running editor of Vogue. And she also started the Met, the Costume Institute, and the Met Gala that's coming up. And it was the war, and it was the 40s. Women were alone, men were deployed. Most domestic help was working in factories. Women were having to either, like, working in factories, juggling lives, single parents. They were doing a lot. And Diana Vreeland, who was very melodramatic, came in with her cigarette in her holder, and she's like, Claire, women are suffering. You know, we need to figure this out. They're having to do all their own housework, and it's awful. And Claire had this idea of like, okay, well, what you really need, here's a clever thing that I don't tell everyone, but you'll appreciate. So because there were ration rules, one of the ration rules was you were not allowed to make new aprons. Aprons were seen as a waste of fabric because they were saving everything for the war as much as possible. So Claire had this idea, well, what if I make a dress that's an apron? What if I make something you can pop over your clothes? And what if I make it from a really durable and smart fabric that was not yet in women's wear, known as denim? Denim did not exist in women's wear. Ladies' Levi's existed, but nobody wore them, like in the world. And so I'm looking up there because you'll see a picture of the dress up there. It's basically a denim wrap dress that has buttons at the waist. And what's so brilliant about the wrap dress and the monastic is when you all are designing a ready-to-wear outfit, what's the hardest thing about anything ready-to-wear? Fit. How often does something fit right off the rack, right? Haute couture could do it because they're designing it to your one body. But with ready-to-wear, how do you solve for the problem of fit? Well, you figure out a dress that doesn't have to be perfectly fitted, but then when you fit it to yourself, it becomes great. So she created a wrap dress, and she jokingly gave it an oven mitt. It had a matching oven mitt.
Yeah, see it there, the red mitt?
Because she's like, oh, you could use this in the kitchen, you could use it in the fireplace, you could use it to garden. And it had huge pockets. She fought to put pockets in all of her clothes because McCardle not only understood the practical value of a pocket, you could put stuff in it, she understood the psychological value of a pocket. How often do you want to put your hands in your pocket when you're uncomfortable? You know, when you're the only woman in a room full of men, you put your hand in your pocket and you suddenly look kind of effortlessly cool, right? So she put pockets and everything, she gave it a wrap, and then every season after, she evolved the design so that it looked a lot like what Diane von Furstenberg started doing in the 70s. So Diane von Furstenberg likes to say she modernized the wrap dress, but really Claire came first. And it was a brilliant solution, and the popover designs became the most successful in her lines every year. And that one sold for $6 because it was meant, which at the time I think was $25, because it was meant to be available to a wide audience.
And just jumping on this, it's just one of the things that I love so much about McCardle's design is you talk again about the democratization of design. You know, these were dresses that didn't need further tailoring and just through design fit everyone. I mean, now the solution to everything is throw a bunch of spandex in it and it should sort of stretch to you. But putting belts to shape or using wraps or using strings to tie that can fit every single body shape, you know, more or less. Obviously there are still different sizes, but within, you know, everybody's unique body shape, they fit. because they could wrap, they could tie, they could simply solve that problem through design. And it was so innovative at the time to think that. Really having something that fit your body and your shape was only reserved to people that could either sew it themselves, which not a lot of people could do, or hire tailors to do for them.
Yeah, so I want to bring this back to you as students as well. So one of the things that she, as a businesswoman, right, she believed that you had to own what you were doing. You had to understand what you were doing. You had to do the work to know what you were doing. So she hired young women to be her assistants, but she insisted that they took studies in art history. She insisted that they knew anatomy. She said, you need to know how the body moves. If you don't know how the body moves, how the hell are you making clothes for a body that you don't understand? So she was very adamant about the seriousness of what she was doing. And at that time, when Elizabeth first came this morning with Kate, there was a group of women that were mocking fashion at this time as fashion, because fashion is fleeting. And these women did not want to be looked at as cute little dolls. They were serious-minded business people, and they took it very seriously. So when she did something, there was a lot of thought. Nothing happened by accident. Everything was placed. She wanted buttons that buttoned, bows that tied and held something together. She did not want adornment. She let the fabric do the work. And that's a very modern concept. It really is. If all of you out, the design students now, you go to museums, you hear people talk, you read books. It's really about the fabric and really understanding the fabric. And Claire understood the fabric, and she worked with American textile designers to develop the fabrics that would best suit her purposes. Again, form and function. So from a business perspective, she was her customer. She did not let someone define her. She refused to let someone define her in any way, shape, or form. So she was rebellious. I mean, you look at that image of her on the glass, you see her like cut in half, that long sort of black halter, which is actually two pieces. But she was this very happy woman from the Midwest that didn't have a worry about her. She was not going to let anyone define her, box her. And I think as students, that's a valuable lesson. Right? You need to know what you need to do, right? You do need to be trained so that you can execute your creativity. Claire is a believer in that, but once you get to that point, explore. Explore. I mean, she used fabrics, like I said, she was using denim, like Elizabeth said, denim when no one would touch denim. Denim was the working class. It was for people in the out west that were mining. Look at what denim has become. It's like an Uber industry, right? It's like everywhere you look, and now we've got grays of denim, right? Everybody wants Japanese denim, right? They want indigo dyed denim. It's not just denim anymore. And she saw the possibilities when no one else did. And so to know her name today, I think it's really important because you're standing on her shoulders. You are really standing on her shoulders. I know that's a cliche, but the more you know about these people, the more you realize how true it is, right?
And today a lot of designers, I mean, I talked to a lot of designers about Claire, and you know, Tory Burch and Calvin Klein and Isaac Mizrahi and others, they all say, Anna Sui, like she's the reason, she's an inspiration to them directly. So the general public may have forgotten Claire McCardle, but the fashion industry never did. She's influencing people globally. There's a young Irish designer whose name I'm forgetting, and he also, I mean, Europe, everywhere. And I think that that's what intrigued me about writing this book, is that back in the day, she was written about a lot. She was on the cover of Time magazine. She was on the cover of Life. She was a household name. So part of it is, why was she forgotten? And the sad truth is that there's a lot of women and others who get forgotten in the history books. I think that there are those of us trying to remedy that. But I think the other thing is that, you know, Claire was very, very smart. And in the day that she was working in, people often called her shy. They're like, oh, this shy young woman from Maryland, you know? And I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't track. You can't be shy and she became the first, she did it, she got her name on her label. She became the first ready-to-wear designer in America to get their name on a label. She became a partner in her firm. And that doesn't suggest shyness to me. So I really wanted to understand through the writing of this book how it is that she did it, because I want to know. Like, as an artist and a writer, I want to understand how she did it. And you live in an interesting place, right? What you do isn't just pure art. Fashion is one of those rare places where art meets commodity. What you design needs to be sellable and saleable. Certainly there's fashion art, but like you want to have careers where what you design goes out into the world. And so you have to figure out all these other steps along the way that are required to get your work out into the world, and to know how to do that so that when somebody says no to you, you can figure out a way to work around them, frankly. Because you're going to hear no all the time. And I love that she heard no and she just kept going.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really moved me reading the book, too, is you hear time and time again where she was told no or where she failed. You know, she didn't get to go to fashion school at first. She had to go to the normal local college. She had struggled getting a job out of college. You know, like you said, time and time again, she heard no or she failed. And so hers is not just a story of genius and innovation, but of tenacity and just grit, too. It's really moving.
Well, and okay, let's go back to the ballet flat story. It's like, here's the war, shoes are rationed. Leather is a high-priced commodity. You get one shoe ticket a year, so you can only buy one new pair of shoes a year. And McCardle had this idea. How many of you dance? Does the name Capezio sound familiar? You know Capezio? Well, Capezio was right down the street from her on Broadway at the time, and so she went to meet Ben Summers, the head of Capezio Ballet Slippers, and said, what if you made shoes, ballet shoes, out of the fabrics to match my dresses for the runway? And the ballet flat was born. One of the most enduring shoes, shapes, and styles ever was born out of this moment of necessity meets creativity. And I love that because, again, she did not come from the center of fashion. She did not come from Paris. She was not high society. She was moving in a world that felt foreign and uncomfortable to her because she was around a lot of very wealthy, high society people. And she figured out that that was her superpower because she was going to design what she wanted. She saw the gap in the marketplace, and she knew that she was the gap, and she filled it. And I just love that because, again, you know, also as someone who did not come from a place of, you know, family wealth or writing, you know, just that path to how do you get to that place where you're starting to write your own rules feels like a story that I wanted to understand.
I want to take some questions and then, of course, have Elizabeth sign books, but I just want to leave you, read this one little paragraph that kind of hit me really hard. It said everything to me. Nothing, least of all a dress, is overly precious. Take a seam ripper to it and be free. Remember, fashion can be fickle, she wrote, and it changes constantly. It never stands still. Take advantage then, and make your own rules. McCardle believed that above all, your job is not so much tracking down the clothes as tracking down yourself. That's pretty heavy.
I love that. Thank you. That's one of my favorites.
No, but that to me was like, that's what I want. Well, we would hope you take away from this, right? That she really believed in the self. Who are you? Like, you know, we talk about designers, we talk about trends and aesthetics, right? Her trends were not what she saw around her. Her trends were here. They were real things that she wanted to see, and those became her trends. She didn't want to copy. That was how people do business. That's why these young designers were so disgusted, because all they were doing was regurgitating what they could remember. Trust me, the houses in Paris were very aware of what was going on. They would make believe, like, they would have a code, like LS was long sleeve, VN was V-neck, like they couldn't write anything down. And they had to do it from memory. But there were these designers that said, what am I doing? I'm not designing. And we're in that dilemma today, right? AI, look at AI, right? It's telling you what you could do to make money. But are you designing anymore? Are you creating anything anymore? That's what, if she were alive today, she'd be rebelling against that, right? And I'm not telling you to rebel. You do whatever you want. You want to do fast fashion, go for it. But what I'm saying is to find your true self, you have to kind of walk away and go inside and find what is important to you. And as you pointed out, Elizabeth, to your customer. Who are you talking to? Who are you trying to reach? And that will inform what your trends, so to speak, should be. Not what everyone else is doing. When she put pockets on dresses, that was like an abomination. Women, it was masculine. So now what, you're trying to make women into men? I mean, we're warped now. Think about then. Whoa, that was super warped, right? Because you couldn't have done that. But pockets? You look at it now, you listen to what I'm saying, you're probably like, who the hell cares about pockets?
Everybody does. Every time you say to a woman, that's a nice dress, how many times are they like, and it has pockets? Like, we're still trying to get pockets.
Or I wish it had pockets.
Yeah, so to your point, it's like everything's cyclical, right? And part of what made me want to write this book is like, oh my God, we're right back where she was in 1950. It is the 1950s again, y'all. It's happening, right? So I opened the book with a story of this very confused journalist saying, you all went out in the workplace and you made these strides. Then Dior comes back post-war in 1947. He comes in with, he wants everyone to have a wasp waist, right? He wants everyone to have, he wanted an 18-inch waist on his models. I tell them the story about models fainting in the showroom as they were being put into these crazy corsets. And it was dubbed the new look, one of the most famous moments in fashion history, the new look. And McCardle and her cohorts were like, this isn't new, this is a regression back to my Victorian grandmother. What is going on? Well, where do we see wasp waists today? Look at the Bezos wedding. Look at any Kardashian. Look at the women who are getting surgeries to have their ribs shaved down. The wasp waist is back. And so when I talk about this in certain other contexts, I ask this question of like, why are we wanting to corset the waist again? What fashion is both cyclical, it's political. Fashion is culture writ large. Like, you as fashion designers are readers of culture, are creators of culture, are purveyors, you're mirrors. But more than that, you're looking out ahead and you're understanding and you're reading the ground and you're telling us what's coming. And so I will just say I very much look forward to seeing what you all produce, and I look forward to wearing and buying your clothes one day and seeing what comes out of this semester.
Do you want to say anything else? Or?
Sure. There's one passage of the book to contrast, since we're talking about the contrast between Dior, again, a designer that we probably all know, or everyone here knows, and Claire McCardle, and sort of what they did for women and for fashion. And Claire was asked about Dior, and she referenced one of her fan letters she got from a customer. The customer explained to her that her Claire McCardle dress, bought years prior at Lord & Taylor, had originally been worn as a gown when she was pregnant with her third child. After giving birth, she had taken in the seams, and it served me just as well in my natural shape as in my maternity dress. The garment became a traveling uniform when her husband's work required that they trek through Peru and Guatemala. It looked nice without ironing, she wrote, and had been worn as a house dress, a beach robe, an evening gown with lots of bracelets, and my hair combed. The dress had survived yet another journey along the Amazon River in a small, filthy, wood-burning river steamer, where it had held up being washed in the Rio Negro and being pawed out by curious monkeys. While Dior's women couldn't walk, eat, sit, or breathe, McCardle's women were exploring the Amazon on riverboats. Now, does Dior get letters like that?
Think about it, right? It's true. So, that's great. I'm glad that was a great letter. I remember reading that and laughing. Does Dior women, do they show up in the Amazon? Could you imagine? That would be one hell of a photo shoot.
There was one poor woman who was an editor at Vogue who had to get her husband to help her button the buttons up the back, and it was these tiny little buttons, and the guy's like, oh my God, he's mad. Like, what's going on? And there were women, again, unable to get dressed by themselves, right? Like, you're taking away the capacity to just even put on a dress by yourself.
Well, it was a man's vision of what a woman should look like.
Yeah.
So you need to reclaim your own vision, right? Don't let someone, especially a man, tell you what you should look like. But anyway, I'd like to open it up for questions. So if anybody has a question for Elizabeth, now would be the time. Come on.
So you had said that Claire Ricardo was forgotten. So how was she on your radar, or was she always on your radar?
That's a great question. So where I live in Baltimore, there's a museum where her brothers, so McCardle died young, and this is a question I often get, which is why didn't her label carry on, right? Well, McCardle was literally building the bridge as she walked across it. At the time, there was no precedent for carrying on the label of a ready-to-wear designer, because she was among the first to even become a ready-to-wear designer with her name on a label. By contrast, Christian Dior, they were the same age. I didn't realize that till I researched this book. Dior and McCardle died within months of each other. They both died young. They were in their 50s. Dior, of course, because the haute couture system in France was centuries old, he already had a young Yves Saint Laurent waiting in the wings to come in and be his next designer. But when Claire died, there was no such precedent. And so her label died with her when she did in the 50s. And I think, so wait, the question was why? Oh, how did she get on my radar? So it was the 1990s, I'm dating myself. I was out of college. I'm at this museum in Baltimore where the museum and FIT did a joint show because they both have archives of McCardle's work. And none of you were alive in the 90s. It was a really awful time to be a woman in a professional world because the suits were terrible. There were no pockets. I was sweaty. I looked really ugly. Someone told me I should wear this color that was like a terrible color for me, but it was like the color that was in that season. And I literally looked like an Easter egg. I looked awful. And I was standing there at this exhibition with my lipstick and my keys and this ugly suit with no pockets, and I'm looking at her clothes and I'm like, what happened? How did I get here? Like, why am I wearing this? And I never forgot her. And then I became a journalist and I wrote a story about her for the Washington Post magazine in 2018. It was the anniversary of one of her important dresses. And in doing that article, I realized that there was a book and that her story really should be told. So what a lot of people don't realize is like the Met, museums around the world have collections of Claire McCardle. And in her lifetime, she was given one of the first retrospectives of an American designer at a Los Angeles gallery because she was considered to be the pioneer of an aesthetic movement. She really was seen as being, you know, the purveyor of a whole new look. No pun intended, Dior.
Anyone else? No questions. Go ahead.
Hi. If Claire was still designing clothes today, what do you think she would do differently in terms of what we're seeing right now?
So the question was, if Claire were designing clothes today, what do you think she would do differently in terms of what we're doing now? I think a couple things would surprise Claire. In her lifetime, women were on the ascendancy and were actually starting to, like her, become partners in firms. There was a recent CFDA survey not too long ago that shows that women rarely hold high positions now in most fashion companies, which I think would shock her. So I think she'd be like, well, let's fix that, number one. Number two, I think she would be really disappointed with fast fashion, in part because she was very environmentally conscious and aware. And I think that for her, this idea was that she thought that clothes should last. She was very interesting because here's a problem you have in fashion, right? You have to keep selling it. So if you sell clothes one season, what do? You gotta get everybody ginned up to buy it again next season. And so Claire had this whole philosophy of buy my dress, make it yours, wear it for a lifetime, do what you need to it, and it's incumbent on me to design what you'll need next season so that you'll keep buying from me. Which not everybody loved in manufacturing because they're like, no, the button should fall off and it should be cheap because then they'll buy another one. And so I think she would be really interested sort of in those processing parts, but on a positive side, I think she'd be stoked by like fabric science and textile science. I think she would be really interested in what's happening in textile science and would be really excited to figure out how to take those materials and make them into clothes that work for people. Thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead and back.
You mentioned that there were some women that you had hired and mentored. Did any of them continue on into fashion or different parts of the
Yeah, so she did, the question was, you had mentioned that Claire mentored some people, did they continue on in fashion? And yeah, a lot of them did. And in fact, a few of them did quite well over the years. And if you ever see, I have their names in the book, if you ever see their names on anything vintage, you buy it up. Mildred Orrick was one of them, there were some others. And they all had really successful careers. But again, that generation of women isn't quite as well remembered in name, even though they were so pivotal in what they did to bring about modern fashion. But yeah, a lot of people who worked with Claire, in fact, Claire knew that if she was doing it right, her assistants would be her competitors. And she invited that. And so I tell a story in the book about one young woman who got offered a job to basically be a competing designer at another sportswear label. And she sent her off, like gave her a minute, and said essentially what Michael told you. Like, don't listen to the haters. Fashion is fickle, live through it, you know, like be true to yourself and do the best you can to follow your own vision and advocate for it.
Okay. So,
I think we have
oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Can you highlight more of the sustainability things that Claire did? I mean, even like during the war, just like highlight some of the things she did.
Yeah, so the question was, can I highlight some of the other sustainable things that Claire did even through the war? I mean, Claire was someone who grew up in a small town, so she had very pragmatic parents. She lived through the Depression. You can't live through the Depression and not have a real appreciation and understanding of the value of something. So she believed a couple of things. She believed that you did not have to spend money on buying new things, that you didn't keep needing to chase new things. She was a really big believer and was very clever in reappropriating old items, even in her own closet. So that night that she went to the gallery opening, the first woman designer, the first American designer to ever have a gallery opening, she wore a 10-year-old dress because she still liked it. And she just did it differently with her hair and her makeup and her jewelry. And that really struck me because, like, I know so many of us would probably be like, I gotta get a new dress, I'm gonna be the center of attention. She used fabrics that were humble, right? Like not expensive fabrics. She worked with calicos and ginghams and other things that, like cottons and things that weren't expensive. And she figured out in the engineering of them how to make them work. So she really was an engineer. She really was one of the first to take fashion design thinking and apply it to modern manufacturing. How do you make it a repeatable pattern that can be produced and ready to wear? And so in a lot of ways, what she was bringing to these humble fabrics was a level of geometric understanding and patterning that would turn them into something that people would wear and not throw out.
I want to add too that in the book you mentioned she talked about upcycling wool blankets from the war. Like the Army had surplus blankets, and she actually instructed women how to make coats from the blankets. So, and she used parachute fabric, literally parachute fabric that was left over or available. So I think that's really kind of cool, right? She was challenged by these restrictions, but they pushed her to new options, right? Which is kind of wonderful. Like she saw opportunity, and mostly, you know, fashion back then was, you guys are a little bit more experimental. Back in that day, no. It literally was Paris. Paris, then became Paris, London, maybe Rome, New York was in the mix, that's it. But it had to come from those places with that pedigree. And Claire was like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. You can make this in your kitchen.
Yeah. So that's the other thing she did. Yes, she started to give patterns, because not everyone could go to Lord & Taylor and buy her dress. So she started to license out patterns so that women could sew. And there was one woman who said, I want to thank you, you know, for making these dresses and for these patterns. And she's like, I get to now make my own Claire McCardles at home. And so she had that symbiotic relationship with her customer that felt really personal. And as one woman wrote, you know, I wouldn't trade my McCardle for a house full of Dior's.
Think about that, right? That says a lot right there. So I think that's, again, another thing to think about when you're a designer on the ascendancy, that what's important? What is really important at the end of the day, right? Is it the quality? Is it bringing the detail? Like when you talked about the dresses, I brought a group of students maybe a year ago to FIT to see an exhibit. Off to the side, they had just this little glass kind of cube, and in there were 4 McCardle dresses. I don't even know how they happened to be there, but I was there, and my students kind of wandered around the corner, and they were like, what's this, right? And then I told them who it was, and blah, blah, blah. And I left. I came back. They were standing, they hadn't moved. They were sketching madly, everything. The level of detail that she brought to these fabrics like gingham and cotton, the mitering, the bust line, all the darts, it was like she was making a couture dress. And that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to bring that level of design to you.
Yeah, and
why shouldn't you have it?
And she took top stitching from jeans and used it in dresses so that then the
Right,
seams would hold up. She put hem stitching in the she'd give you extra fabric in the hem so you could adjust. And so, like, that's the other thing, is she was borrowing from menswear. She was like, oh, look at this, the tie silk, that's much sturdier. So she made she called it a kitchen dress. She didn't call it that, they called it at the time a kitchen dress. But it was this idea of like, oh, well, why can't I take the silk fabrics used in ties and make a dress out of it? So she just had this idea, like fabric salesmen loved her because they'd walk in with like a whole case. She'd be like, sure, I'll take from anywhere, I don't care. And this book really made me think about this. Why do we gender fabric? Why do we gender color? Why do we say this is allowed to be on this and that's not allowed to be on that? Like, that makes no sense. Just decide that the boundaries don't exist and see what you come up with. And do we still deal with this today? Just ask my teenage daughter who's in a public high school in Baltimore who gets dress coded. Yes, we're still dealing with this. It still happens, right? So a lot of what Claire was going through and solving for are still things that you're dealing with and solving for.
Kevin, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. Why the constant comparison to Dior?
Oh, why the constant comparison to Dior? Because as I write about in the book, they got into a bit of a battle, the two of them. And so what you had is a battle between American designers and French designers, where the American fashion industry didn't really exist in the way it does now until the war happened. So when Paris goes dark, McCardle was one of the last designers in Paris before it fell to the Nazis. I write about that in the book. And Paris goes dark, and so New York became really the center of creating the fashion industry in America. And when Paris came back, Paris wanted their title back. They're like, forget you, New York. The American look, nah, we're not doing sportswear, we're back. And so Dior came back with like this elegance and this femininity, and we're making women women again, and forget it. And so there was this real battle between New York and Paris, which culminated in a great book that was written by Robin Given and then later became a show, which was The Battle of Versailles, where you had Halston. It was that era where it was like this showdown between French designers and American designers, and Halston won that battle in the 70s. So that's such a great question. Dior kind of became symbolic of this French desire to reclaim the throne. And he came in and he said to America, you need to buy my clothes, you need to dress like me. And I quote this one guy from the Midwest who basically said, forget your genius, you've disfigured my wife. And basically, you know, another woman got like the long Dior skirt caught in a bus wheel. And so there was this idea of, you know, here was France coming to tell America what they needed to look like again. And someone said to McCardle, well, do you think that you should suffer for fashion, talking about Dior? And McCardle said, no, absolutely not. Comfort is the keynote of style. And I believe that too, because when you're not comfortable in what you're wearing, how able are you to show up in your life? And we've all been with that friend who's like, or us, we're fidgety because we're not comfortable in our own clothes. And that becomes the inhibitor to you inhabiting your life. And so McCardle was very much about fashion should serve the individual. And she said, fashion is fickle, don't worry about it. Find your own style, follow your own style. And so that's why and since we're talking about McCardle and Dior, and we're wrapping this up, I wanted to show that I made you guys something that I want to leave you with. I made some McCardle versus Dior tote bags. And this is McCardle's favorite shade of red, and this was also a font that she liked that I had a designer friend in Baltimore create, and we had these screen printed by a buddy of ours in Baltimore. So, wear it proudly.
Oh,
McCardle versus Dior.
It's wonderful.
So,
I'm going to wear it as a feedback.
you can just wear it. I mean, because we don't have enough totes in our lives, right?
What I would love for you guys to do before she signs some books, unless there's one more question, I'd be happy to take. Anybody have a, go ahead.
Is there any other designers or brands that you feel like is kind of close to like McCartney, or it has that similar ideology of like finding people who have like fitted clothes to their personal style?
Today or back then? So I'm going to admit that I'm not as like tuned in to some of the young designers. I'd love to know that from you. I'd love to know like who's on your radar. Because I can tell you that like on the high echelon level, you have people like Tory Burch who literally licensed some of McCardle's designs, and back in 2022 did a fashion show on the streets of New York wearing McCardle inspired clothes. But I'm really curious about I want to know who the next McCardle is, right? Like who's doing some cool stuff that tell me when we're signing books. I want to know. Yeah.
So before we do that, I'd love for you guys, the people that got books, and even the people that didn't get books, I would love for us to get in front of those images and take a group shot with Claire, if that's okay with you, before we all disperse. So just meet us over here and we'll get a picture.
Thanks.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. That's for you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.